Well, hello people, and welcome back to episode 6 of Project Skylines. I hope you're having a wonderful day. We are rebuilding Knox Country from the game Project Zomboid in Stage 2. In the last episode, the huge farming town of Brandenburg went in, adding to the ever-growing metropolis that is becoming Knox Country, really starting to piece together with the 6 builds in the map now. And today, we're heading to West Knox Country to build out Ekron Echo Creek steel plant. Let's get stuck into it, shall we? With the biggest surface episode yet. So open up the most amount of tiles, and from this perspective you really get a sense of just how big this area is when it's next to the Doe Valley. There's more surfaces here. This is the most amount of surfaces on the map this episode, so it should start calming down once we leave Irvington, which will be the episode after this one. I'm heading over to Mordra, where it's much more dense with buildings and city infrastructure. But we'll get started with the road time lapse, getting everything set up around the first town we'll tackle today, Ekron. So getting started on Ekron, this is a really cool town. There's a train line fully fenced in going right through the middle. In Project Zomboid, there's a broken down train, for obvious reasons, on the lines that I always thought would have made a really cool base. Requires quite a lot of work, but would be super unique. Let me know if anyone's tried that before. But the centre of Ekron is really small, simple commercial, parking behind buildings, and our basic selection of single, 2-story homes. Always more great inspiration to be taken from the Project Zomboid map, of course, just in terms of these 2 tiny little car parking spaces that sit behind the building, with the fencing backing onto residential around it. Such a small little minute space, but once it's all in, it looks just so cute. And we do have both cargo and passenger trains passing on this line as well. Bringing in the pedestrian crossing, which is a little bridge. It's maybe a little steep in the scale of CS2, but I had to bring it up to that height so the power lines don't clip through it, with more housing going in around it. There's also a little playground at the foot of the bridge too. And then bringing in the last of the commercial, which is all plopped and functional. A mix of office also present in here too. With the left side of the track starting to come together, brought in the community centre, for which the fully upgraded UK elementary school actually serves a really nice kind of community centre vibe with a 2-storey building and lots of parking around it. There's also a gas station configuration right on the edge of town here that borders onto the vast farmland. I didn't end up even recording all of the surface work today. There is tons of it in the video, of course. Lots of inspiration, but there was so much this episode. I thought the next episode, Irvington, would have been worse, but no, it was this one, which was a lot of fun to build, of course. On the gas station, we have some little rest areas, picnic benches, down a pathway, and what a fun way to use a surface, right? I'd never think of using it like that before, without really looking at Zomboid. And then there's more little commercial spots, gas stations, laundromats, and food marts, all casually dotted around this main street. There's also a big bit of industry right in the middle of Ekron as well. Of course, from a city skylines perspective, you'd never do this. This would cause pollution problems. But one of the ploppable 6x6 works quite nice. And then also the fire station going in, for which the modern fire station did a really nice job of recreating the Ekron fire station. Parking alongside it and all the room around the edge. Does also make a really good base this, by the way, if you want to play Zomboid. But it is quite busy, so be prepared for a fight to take it. More of the larger homes on the edge of town going in now with the farms and just the general nicer aesthetic. It's quite a different mix of homes, Ekron. There's kind of like really small, shabby farm houses, and then these quite enormous houses with pools, which is quite diverse for such a small town. The first of many thousands of surfaces going in today's episode. There's a little trailer park present here as well, which our favourite trailer house works quite nicely for. With those houses in, we can see the basic shape of Ekron coming together. On the northern exit to town on the road into Brandenburg, there's an abandoned industrial site here clearly alongside the rails. So we decided to bring this back to life with some buildings, fused industry, only a couple of small warehouses, like 4 different buildings here. With some surface work, some basic props, which lines up really nicely as a little rail side industrial battery. Something you could totally do in vanilla CS2 this as well. Just have to be a bit more careful with your zoning, of course. Which ends up looking pretty nice, I think, really simple. Across the road from this and across the tracks is an extension of this industrial site. There's a lot of kind of gas or oil related storage here. I'm guessing probably being natural gas. So lots of silos, pipes and containers with their own surface work to demarcate the property boundary, with the usual high chain link fencing, it's that all around it as well. Such simple details to add to a road network, but as your networks pass through this area, it just looks so convincing. Really happy with how this bit of Ekron turned out. There's also a couple of farms knocking around this industrial site too, towards the very edge of the map boundary. And then it was time to tackle the surfaces, to which this was my reaction upon realizing just how many there were. Oh, there's so many surfaces. There's so many here. Oh, look at all of them. That's so many. Do you know what? I think today's episode might actually be even worse than Irvington for surfaces. The ones in Irvington are bigger. Oh, look at that. Oh, there's so many. Oh, that's so much. That's so many surfaces. Oh no. Oh, what a bitch. So decided to put that off even further by carrying on building out Ekron. Added the church, for which the fully upgraded UK church worked perfectly for. Added in some car parking inspired by what we see on the map, along with the farming infrastructure that tails off into the countryside at this point. Fields, well-trodden ground, and barns, nothing we're not too unfamiliar with at this point in Project Skylines. And if you have made it to this point in the video, don't forget to leave me that zombie emoji down below. Also took some time to tidy up a lot of the crosswalks that are generated with so many node connections on the main road, before finishing the very final housings on the western edge of the town. Behind this little block here is like a little communal garbage space, fencing and surfaces with a couple of dumpsters at the end of it. Such a simple detail, and I'd never have thought to put something like that in a little low density suburb, but the idea of adding in a little communal garbage space, great little suburb inspiration that. Also detailing some more elaborate farm spaces on the western edge too, fences and surfaces that just mark where people are walking and working in these larger houses. Now we turn our attention to Echo Creek, one of the new spawns that was added in build 42. And there's a couple of good things here. There's a gas station, which makes a really good base. There's an auto repair shop, and even a little festival area, which turns out real great proper inspiration. But lots of trailer parks as well, alongside lots of fencing, sand surfaces. It does make a pretty good base, this one. It's pretty quiet. I'd probably say the quietest of all the starting towns. But it is a bit of a drive away from anywhere serious, so getting a car is pretty important if you're going to live out here. Beyond that, you could also just self-sustain by staying in Echo Creek, but that'll become pretty boring after a while. But it isn't boring to build. Across the road from that gas station lies the festival area. There's a little stage here, a couple of food carts, benches, and some, I guess, safety barriers to direct the crowds. Really nice way to translate some of the CS2 props into action. We also have a radio tower in Echo Creek, a little smaller than the one I've used, but I want the functionality of the radio mast here, alongside the last of the single-story homes, going in with the surfaces on the southern edge of Echo Creek. There's also some rows of hay bales again, like we saw in the Dover Valley, so adding these into the fields as well, alongside with the boreal tree line to start giving them that much more definitive edge. You really tell from this clip alone just how much of a difference the tree line makes to those surface fields. They can look very exposed and naked without them. On the eastern entrance to Echo Creek is where we find the auto repair shop, which one of the southwest commercial buildings pretty much works perfectly for. It's exactly the same size and configuration really, with the separate outbuilding. Before our first serious chunk of surface work begins, as we start heading south of the two towns into the huge space that is the countryside of West Knox Country. And we can now start to see Echo Creek take its final form as well. A little bit further down the road from this is a gun range. This was definitely one of the harder buildings to build. There's nothing really that looks like it, so ended up going with a fusing of static ploppable industry buildings, create different heights. It is kind of a 2-3 story building, this gun range. Insanely populated as well. If you haven't been here yet in Build 42, go and check it out. It's probably as bad as the Louisville Mall, I would say. Maybe not that bad actually, but certainly horrendously busy. Probably the busiest kind of countryside location, I would say, the gun range in Echo Creek. But there's lots of fencing, using some sand surfaces to text out the shooting range. And of course I have no targets, so the guys here will be shooting cars, barrels, crates and oil drums and the such like, all out across this range. And there is a little cover here, but there's no real kind of shelter cover prop in CS2. So I decided to go with some firewood shelters, which, if you can overlook the fact they are full of firewood, do look like these little covered shelters that you see at the gun range. There's also a little running course around the back here as well, for which the dog park props came in useful again. And a pretty cool way to use some surfaces to generate a gun range next to a huge gun outlet store. Also use recolor just to change them to a more kind of red brick burgundy colour like the building actually is. A little bit further down the road from the gun range lies the steel plant, which of course in Zomboid is totally destroyed and no longer working. But I thought the paper mill would repurpose perfectly into a big steel infrastructure site. It looks most like a steel plant, alongside with some supporting industry just on the other side of the road. This building is huge and acts as like a real focal point. You can even see it from Rosewood because of course the map is so flat, there's no terrain to block the sight lines. Which is something I'm actually really not minding. That was definitely one of my biggest concerns, playing on a super flat map. Like, I never play super flat Minecraft worlds, right? They're kind of boring. The same with CS2 maps, but as my first super flat project, I'm actually quite enjoying Project Skylines' terrain. Almost a challenge in itself to work with. In and around the gun range and the steel plant, we add in lots more fields, fencing and props to tie this little region together. And with those in, we're starting to see the west of Knox Country beginning to take some shape. After the steel plant, I headed back into the deep countryside where there's a little animal rehab centre, repurposing lots of net lane fencing, chicken coops and small commercial buildings to create this. Again, something I never really would have considered to build out in the country, a little animal rehab centre, without checking the Project Zomboid map first. Lots of services and fencing and a couple of barns, alongside a house which I'm guessing might be the vet's house, also make up the rest of this rehab centre out in the middle of nowhere. There's also a much larger field out here, I'm guessing for perhaps horses or cattle, with a little feeding hole and its own little entranceways. For a lot of the larger fields here, we're using, of course, functioning farms, so this way we'll see the tractors and the harvesters out in the fields, which brings some much needed life into these services, because there's so little population in the city at the minute, and it's so spread apart because of how big this project is. Don't tend to see a lot of people out in the country, so these farms are helping just add that little bit of activity out here, so it doesn't look like everyone's dead like they are in the game. But it's all pretty translatable patterns and concepts out here. Barns, single-story homes, farms and services make up 90% of this huge space. I mentioned a few episodes ago that painting the surfaces in this series is like paint by numbers, which is quite pleasant. And it is. But imagine doing paint by numbers all the time. Every time you load into the game, you play paint by numbers. Every time you go to sleep, you dream of paint by numbers. You walk the dog and eat your dinner, enjoy a walk and come back to more paint by numbers. So it is nice, but it's all the time. But it is worth it once you start to see the field patterns generating as we do here. We also come across our first train station out here as well, in the middle of nowhere. And I can't really think now, flashing back to my Knox Country knowledge, is there any other train stations in the other towns? I don't think West Point has one, even though the train line is there. And I don't think Louisville has one either, does it? Not that I can picture. There's obviously the rail yard, but I can't think of a passenger station. But there is one here, just south of Ekron. One of the vanilla stations worked perfectly, and there's also a little bit of industrial activity at the end of the road that the station sits on. Fused in some car parking roads onto the entrance into the town. Also added some fencing and tree patterns to help create the little area around the station. And then also adding some final tree lines into that immense amount of field work. There's also some more really quirky builds in and around this bit of the map, including a boarding school, which lies up the lake we just drew the road to. We'll get to that a little bit later in the episode using one of the German elementaries, which works out wonderfully well for that. There's like a mini kind of outlet mall as well on the main road that takes you back to Palace Lake and Rosewood from here, alongside plenty more farmhouses that take us out to the mall. There's also a really old western town, which we'll get to, and now there's no real assets to build this, so we end up going with some of the motels, but we'll talk a bit more on that when we get to it. After all of that, we've made a pretty significant dent in most of the surface work in the south. Just really the road to Brandenburg to do now. But progress, nonetheless, you get a much better impression of how it's going here, right? As a note of chawing over the map looking at this build, there's tons of little kind of self-sustaining bases available in this bit of Knox Country. Lots of little lakes by farmhouses that you'd be able to catch fish on. Quite inspiring area really if you want a bit more of a rural farmer lifestyle. Definitely West Knox Country, I think, is the place to set that up. Lots more riverbed thin going in as a well-trodden pathway. We did actually have someone leave a comment saying to use the extra asset dirt pathway, but when you create a junction on this, it kind of creates the blue dimensional tearing if you cross them over one another, which is the reason why I'm avoiding using those dirt pathways. The textures aren't too bad. It's maybe a few extra seconds to draw them in, depending how big it is, but it still gives us that same impression. Now out here in the wilds is a little country retreat by the lake. Use some of the piers to create a little kind of island crossing where you can also find a gazebo. Really fun way to use some of the piers. A static ploppable motel going in to make up, I guess, the retreat building itself, with more pier work infusing out the front of that to create the frontage that we see. There's also a whole bunch of props and well-trodden pathways leading out the back of this into the civilization. You can see the farms on the edge. But sheds, kids' playgrounds and firewood generally make up the work behind the retreat, and the whole thing is fenced in on all sides. This would also make a really good rural base location if you wanted to self-sustain here, especially given the fact that most of the site is fenced in as well. Alongside more pathways back into the pier, and just a small simple collection of services and assets gives us something really cool in the form of a country fishing retreat, doesn't it? Also building out more elaborate farm spaces around the edge of this, before the final tree lines going on the fields between Ekron and Brandenburg. Now we're coming on to the boarding school, which I had no idea this was here really. Kind of shows still how much or how little I know about the new Build 42 map. But the German school, fully upgraded with car parking and extra sub-buildings placed around it with some surface work, gave us a pretty convincing aesthetic of this boarding school, way out in the middle of nowhere. I think the road up to this place is dirt as well, so eventually, given the passage of time in Project Zomboid, this base does kind of become slowly inaccessible unless you're going to clear out the trees every few months, which would be a nightmare. But a really fun base, so if you clear it out and live in a boarding school right next to the lake, it certainly gives me lots of inspiration for a Zomboid playthrough, I think. Just drawing out more nodes on the pathways to help create these courtyards. There's also a little kind of sand, if not well-trodden football pitch at the back of the school as well, for which we do have the goalpost props to make this. Just a bit further down the road towards the main road from the school is a little log cabin with no road to it, it's just out on its own in the woodland. So static ploppables, shed props and lots of surface work, helping us create lots of little rural fishing cabins across this part of the map. We're now on the main road, which takes us back to Rosewood, which is where we'll find the mall, a gated community, and a gun store also over here as well. Did actually lose a character at this gun store, running away from a horde through the forest. I pierced my neck on a branch and bled to death because I didn't bring any bandages with me because it was just a scouting run. But went horrendously wrong. You can't actually do that in Build 42 now. They removed the option, or I guess the ability to be stabbed in the neck by tree branches. So we can't actually have it happen anymore, of course. But for this mall outlet thing, there's a load of electrical XP here, by the way. This place is full of ovens and fridges. But we use the Pinfall Palace, kind of gives us the same vibe we want. There's a storage warehouse also next door, alongside with sheds and a little security booth on the way into this place just off of the highway. Plenty of fencing going in to demarcate each property boundary before we turn our attention to the gated community, which as always, the UK housing is pretty much tailor-made for any gated community buildings on board. There's also a distinctly much larger house as part of this development as well, so we included one of the detached homes from the UK pack, with more tree lines going in around the naked fields near this bit of the city. A bit further up the highway is that gun store we just mentioned, which is accompanied by 3 houses, 2 commercial lots and a gas station. The gun store here isn't even worth it now. It's so small, don't lose your characters here like I did. Now we come on to the old abandoned historic coal town, which is made up of lots of very kind of old western style buildings, very stylized, for which CS2 doesn't have any assets like that. But you can get most of the way there by recoloring a lot of the level 1 and 2 small sized European motels. Kind of gives you that wooden building sort of vibe with the porch, and you can imagine it almost on a western high street, so you have to suspend your disbelief a little bit here. And there's also some smaller homes present just off of the main street here as well. Definitely more of a tourist attraction, this sort of place. I don't think people are living and working here. Then using recolor just to change things to be a bit more kind of brown and burgundy really. Remove a bit of the colour from here. But it doesn't do a too unconvincing job sat in the forest there. Definitely the most challenging bit of today's build, building the old western town. On the very western edge, you can see we're on the map edge here. There's more elaborate farm spaces, so sub buildings and pathways go a long way for helping us create these with the appropriate surfaces around them to box them in as we move towards the end of today's build. One final check before realising there are still some services that need to be done, but beyond that, I'll be happy to see the end of these fields for at least another week. Which leaves us looking a little bit something like that. Let's thank you all so much indeed for watching all the way to the end, guys, if you have enjoyed it. Another super challenging build. Each episode of this project is definitely getting harder and will continue to do so, I imagine. Irvington next week, and then we're on to Mordra and West Point. Thanks for all support on the series. I'm glad to hear you're enjoying it all. An enormous shout out to the YouTube members and patrons that support these videos, with a roll call to our golden patron eggs: Casino, Spartan Angel, Michael W, Bad Wolf, Louis Adlam, Phoenix ND, Blythe, Jamin, and Great C. Thank you so much indeed for all of your incredible support. Likes, comments and shares below always help, and don't forget to check out the link to Instant Gaming. Otherwise, enjoy the cinematics, and I'll shut up and leave it there. I'd like to thank you all so much indeed for watching, and as always, enjoy the rest of your day.